G'day, hi, and welcome. Alright, so this is another one of the voiceovers, and today's topic is keep your feet on the pegs. So, what am I talking about? Well, okay, first off, about 20 years ago when I took the other motorcycle course in Ontario, the way they used to teach us was back brake, front brake when you come into a stop at low speeds. Always use your back brake first because it stabilizes the motorcycle, and you do this kind of like in tandem, but like the back brake comes on like a split second before the front brake. If not, your front end starts diving all over the place because of the abruptness of the stopping power. And what that does is it destabilizes the bike if you're at low speed. Now, one thing I notice with older riders, mainly because they never probably learnt this, and I see it mainly, not to pick on the Harley rider crowd, but the cruiser Harley riders typically, you see them dragging their feet through the lights. There's no reason to be doing that. You're gonna hurt yourself doing that. The way they teach now is, okay, yes, when you're at high speeds, back brake, front brake, and you use both brakes together, 70% of your stopping power is on the front brake, 30% on the back, roughly. But when you get down to, say, speeds of 10 miles an hour or less, you can pretty much just get away with just using the back brake if you're basically coming to a stop. Now, the problem is when you take your feet off the pegs, and you'll see people do it. Dirt bike riders are a different, they've got a different thing going, so they might be using the back brake, front brake, and then they have to put a foot out, whether it's the left foot or the right foot if they're in a turn or whatever. The fundamentals of turning all motorcycles are pretty much the same, but the techniques might vary a little bit from bike to bike. But when we're talking street bikes or cruisers or whatever, or tour bikes, you're typically talking about coming to a stop with the front end straight, and when you do, you want to use the back brake to stabilize the bike, like I mentioned, but you also want to cover the back brake so that if, let's say there's a greasy spot on the ground, whatever it is, that your front end doesn't lose traction. So you can still use both brakes to stop, but then when you come to a full stop, the way they teach it now is you put your left foot out and you keep your right foot on the pegs. Now when you go to take off, you keep covering the back brake. This way, if you're going into a turn or something like that, and let's say just as you're starting to turn, a vehicle cuts you off, well, at least you're on the back brake. You can still basically stop the bike, but you're going to be able to stop the bike without the front end basically turned. Because if your front end isn't completely straight when you go to stop with the front brake, you can basically it's kind of like jackknifing the bike a bit. Your front tire, the more you're leaned over, the more traction, the less traction you have, the more leaned over you are. So if you're making a turn left, right, doesn't really matter. But when you take off, if you're already covering the back brake, you've got that upper hand. And again, is the foot faster than your right hand for grabbing the brake? I don't know, but you might have too much stopping power at low speed on the front brake, and again, that's why they tend to dump the bike at the lights, is that what ends up happening is they have so much stopping power, and if the bike is slightly off balance, meaning your feet aren't on the pegs, you're more likely to destabilize the bike more and then fall down. But if your foot is already on the pegs, and as soon as you start moving, you should be having your pegs on the feet on the pegs pretty much as soon as you start moving, because you're not going to fall over anyway. But some people, they'll drag their feet pretty much 3/4 of the way through the light, or the whole way through the light, before their feet are on the pegs. Now, if something happens and you have to do a fast maneuver or something like that, it takes you that much more time to get your feet on the pegs to respond. Again, you're in more danger. So I think the newer method might be a bit better. Might not work for everybody, but it does work. Where if you take off, your right foot is already on the peg. Even if you're turning to the right, it doesn't really matter. Like once a bike is moving, then you get the bike rolling a bit, and then you can turn left or you can turn right, and it'll be smooth. But let's say you're turning right with your right foot on the peg, covering the back brake. Well, the second you start moving, okay, you you already have one foot on the peg, so you're already partially stabilized. Then you get the other foot up there as quick as possible, with it's all smooth action, of course, and you can bring your knees to the tank, and now you've got complete control over the bike. Again, pertaining to low speed, and then as you accelerate, everything's good, obviously. But as you accelerate, both feet should be on the pegs. But if you're turning left or right and your feet are dangling, if you shift your body weight, or there's puddles or whatever, and it shifts your body weight, you'll feel it through the bars. You'll definitely feel the bike kind of bounce around on you a little bit. Again, depending on road conditions and everything. But you will notice that when your feet are off the pegs, the bike is less balanced. And the worst time to be unbalanced is at low speeds, because that's when you need to have the most balance, because you don't have enough inertia or momentum to keep the bike upright. You need to now apply your body, shifting your weight around, which is a lot easier if your feet are on the pegs. And in fact, you'd be surprised how slow you can actually ride with your feet on the pegs. What people normally, and I see this happen quite a bit too, where I'll come to, I haven't seen it on this bike yet, but when I was in town, I remember I used to ride, even on my Harley, when I had my Panhead Harley hardtail, I was on the pegs as quick as possible. I'd go through, say, a left turn at a light, and there would be a guy ahead of me, and he'd be basically putting his foot out. If he was turning left, he'd be putting his foot out left. If he was turning right, he'd be putting it kind of like what you'd see on a dirt bike. And you'd see these guys constantly cross the yellow line. They'd either cut across the yellow line, or they would turn and overshoot their lane a bit and go, kind of like really wide, because they'd have to use all that much more room just to turn the bike, because the bike wasn't stable, right? And if you try to force it while it's unstable, it'll go over. But however, if they were to go through that same light, get the bike moving a little bit forward, and then throw their feet on the pegs as quickly as possible, stabilize the bike as quickly as possible, they'd find that they wouldn't even have to go that fast to be able to turn the bike even more precisely. Not only stay in the lane that they want, but they could stay within the lane of the lane that they want. And this takes skill. Most newer riders, not younger riders, but newer riders, whether they're young or old, will basically, like taking a corner like this, they'll take it and they'll slow right down, and then they'll take their feet off the pegs because they get nervous, and that's when bad things happen. It's a strange urge at lower speeds to, and the urge to want to put your foot out. That's what gives you that more uncomfortable feeling of basically the bike feeling less stable, and it also makes you more nervous, and then it makes you more nervous, and then you do more abrupt actions, and then you're not basically doing the right maneuvers, and of course you'll go down. So getting your feet on the pegs really early, the best way to learn how to do that is obviously find a parking lot or someplace where you can practice low speed handling. Pretty much everything you learn in a course now, take that, whatever motorcycle you buy. I was talking, some people were posting on my blogger post there the other night, and they're saying, yeah, as soon as I get my bike next year, I'm going to practice all that. The problem is a year later you might not remember everything. So if you just took the course, write down the procedures of what you learned. Like all the different stages. There's about 8 or 10 different stages that you'll learn, all pertaining, you learn how to turn left, you learn how to turn right, you learn how to stop, you learn how to go, you learn how to emergency brake, you learn how to, what's called precision brake, where you downshift, let out the clutch between each brake, braking. And then of course you learn low speed handling, where you try to ride the bike as slow as possible. And then of course you learn what's called evasive maneuvers, basically going around objects and stuff like that. I already did a video on push steering and counter steering. So when you're learning that stuff too, you can't really learn that stuff at low speeds unless you have the basic fundamental of keeping your, and I want you to watch this turn here, not this one right here, but the one I'm about to do. Again, I got both feet on the pegs, and I'm just using my back brake here. So you can see how sharp I'm turning the bike here. It looks like I'm walking the bike around, but I'm actually not. Uh, that's how much control I have over the bike. So that's pretty good. But when you slow down that much, the bike, because the balance feels a little bit weird, uh, your uh, your urge is to put your foot down. Now, I would never tell somebody that's just beginning to try to turn that tight. I've got experience, that type of thing, and I've been practicing in a larger area to see how tight I can turn this bike, and I can turn it in about 14 feet at low speed. But I mean, I'm talking like at 2 miles an hour. And then as soon as I get through the turn, I could start accelerating again just before it falls over. And I know where the friction point is on the clutch, and I know when to tap the back brake, or just kind of like snug the back brake to do that. But my feet do not come off the pegs. Now, however, halfway through that turn, if I were to take my feet off the pegs, I would destabilize the bike with the bars turned, which, if the bars are turned and you touch the front brake with the bike unstable, it's a recipe for disaster. And that gets a lot of people when they're new. So fighting the urge to take your feet off the pegs at low speed, go somewhere, like I say, a big parking lot that's abandoned somewhere, do figure eights, go as slow as you can, do them really wide at first, then do circles, to the left, to the right, practice taking off to the left, to the right, getting your feet on the pegs, until you can do it with confidence. But you won't have confidence unless you trust the bike. And to trust the bike, you got to stay with the bike. In other words, you got to have your... As soon as the bike is starting to move, at that point, put your feet on the pegs, and then learn to feel the friction point and the balance points. And then by that time, you'll get it. But it's very important that you keep your feet on the pegs. All right, have a great day, eh?